I too would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, whose cultures and customs have nurtured this ancient land for thousands of years. I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present with us today. I am very pleased to be invited to make a presentation to this conference, and I thank the Australian Institute of Family Studies for giving me this opportunity on behalf of the Royal Commission. So we have understood that the central focus of this conference is research to results, and that, of course, is at the heart of one of the key mechanisms of the Royal Commission in doing its work. In an endeavour to meet our terms of reference, we have engaged in a major research program which has and we hope will continue to assist us to arrive at recommendations that are likely to span policy, legislative reform, structural reform, and administrative reform. So I will come back to speak more specifically about our research program, but I thought that I would give you a brief outline of the work of the Royal Commission because many of you will have seen parts of it taking place, but I think it's probably unusual, unless you're fairly close up to it, to have an understanding of the full breadth of the work that's going on behind the scenes. So our work is constructed around terms of reference. Those terms of reference were issued by the Commonwealth via a process called the issuing of letters patent, and that happened on the 11th of January 2013. The introduction to those letters patent, or sometimes referred to as recitals, to the terms of reference, demonstrate that the government acknowledged that all forms of child sexual abuse are a gross violation of a child's right to protection under Australia's international obligations, as well as a crime under Australian law. The recitals also acknowledge that the sexual abuse of a child and other related unlawful and improper treatment of children has a long-term cost to individuals, to the economy, and to our society as a whole. And sadly, our work to date bears out the reality of those recitals with stark and painful clarity. So under our terms of reference, we're required to inquire into institutional responses to allegations and incidents of child sexual abuse, and in particular to inquire into, and these are not words directly quoted out of the terms of reference, but my summary of them, what governments and institutions should do to better protect children against institutional sexual abuse in the future, so the prevention aspect of our work. Best practice in encouraging the reporting of allegations and the response to those reports, so the investigative part of our work and the reporting and responding right across a whole range of institutional responses. Reducing or eliminating impediments to appropriate responses. And finally, alleviating the impact of institutional child sexual abuse, including in ensuring justice for victims through redress, criminal justice processes and support services. You'll readily see, if you pause for just a moment to think about the breadth of that across the full diversity of our country, that it's no surprise that after the initial 3-year appointment period, we were extended for another 2, so that the full breadth of the Commission will be across 5 years. Our terms of reference define institution, and I won't take you to the words of the detailed words in the definition of institution, but it is very broad and includes effectively, for example, any entity or group of entities, including one that no longer exists, that provides or has at any time provided activities, facilities, programs or services of any kind that provide the means through which adults have contact with children, including through their families, but our definition specifically excludes the family as an institution. We're also required to look at sexual abuse in an institutional context. So we have many examples of circumstances arising where, for example, a family may have had what turns out to be a perpetrator introduced to them through a sporting group, a school, a church group, even though ultimately the sexual abuse has not occurred either on the premises of that institution or indeed during an activity directly associated with the institution. We have still taken the view that that has occurred in our definition of an institutional context. Let me just come back briefly to the issue of family not being included in the definition for the purposes of this Royal Commission. There has been, as some of you may know, and continues to remain concern in some quarters, that the numbers of children sexually abused in institutions or in an institutional context are far fewer than the number of children abused inside families. And it's then said, why focus on that smaller group rather than where the larger numbers are? Well, of course, the short answer to that is that that is obviously not a question for us, as we were appointed with the terms of reference that were set by the government for us. But let me hasten to say that the letters patent note that whilst our inquiry will not specifically examine the issue of child sexual abuse outside institutional contexts, it states, and I do quote directly, any recommendations you make are likely to improve the response to all forms of child sexual abuse in all contexts. That, of course, is our hope, and I consider it a well-placed hope. Much of what's emerging in our work has clear relevance to the detection and reporting of all forms of child sexual abuse, in particular to the systems of investigation and prosecution of child sexual abuse generally, as well as to the deepening understanding of the impact of sexual abuse upon a child in the short, medium and longer term. And in turn, these matters will have relevance in many ways to child protection, to family law, to police and criminal justice legal systems, and to service supports and responses. We are approaching our task via the terms of reference in a number of ways. We, as you can imagine, I said right at the beginning, once one draws breath, after receiving those letters patent, we realised quite quickly that our task was truly enormous. And we have effectively used a three-pronged approach, sometimes referred to as the 3 pillars of our work. These 3 pillars are our private sessions, in which commissioners will bear witness to the experiences of victim survivors, the public hearing part of our work, and our research and policy program. And ultimately, it's the information collected through these three pillars which will directly inform our work, and the development of our findings, the substance of our analysis, and our conclusions, and ultimately our recommendations. So let me go now to each of those three pillars and explain a little bit about those, each of those aspects of our work, and I'll come back to the research part last to spend a little bit of time on that in particular for our purposes today. So our terms of reference require us to bear witness to the abuse and trauma inflicted on a person as a child who has suffered sexual abuse within our definition of institutional context. Most significantly, we are doing that with those people who wish to be heard in a private and confidential setting. Early in the life of the Commission, when looking at the current structure of both the Commonwealth Royal Commissions Act and the state-based acts, we realised that we did not have a mechanism for doing, a legal mechanism for doing the private sessions work in the way in which we thought appropriate. And the government were amenable to our approaches to have the legislation amended to allow us to do our work in that way. So private sessions are meetings between one or two commissioners, generally one these days, and a victim survivor and his or her support people that he or she wishes to bring into the room with them. It's an opportunity for them to tell their story in their own words, in a private, confidential and supported atmosphere. So as I've indicated to you, it's obviously a process new to Royal Commissions altogether. These private sessions afford, obviously, attendees the opportunity to have their story heard by the Royal Commission and to have the fact of their abuse acknowledged. The vast majority of people attending private sessions express the importance of that acknowledgement to us. And many come to us with the stated aim of wanting to break their silence to help stop the scourge of the sexual abuse of children. To give you a sense of the enormity of what that has meant for a number of people in our country, I have our current figures for you. As of July 1, 2016, the Commissioners have held 5,502 private sessions. We have also received hundreds of written accounts from survivors or their family and friends. Each one of these written accounts has been read and acknowledged by a Commissioner. There are presently 1,523 people in the queue awaiting a session with us. Throughout 2016, we have continued to receive, on a weekly basis, an average of 38 new requests for a private session, even though we've been operating private sessions since May 2013. So depending on the range of commitments of the 6 commissioners, generally we'll have at least 2 of us sitting in private sessions at any given time during the week, somewhere in Australia. In this way, we're averaging approximately 36 sessions a week, so you can readily see that we're struggling to keep up with the demand, which is why we have had to make the very difficult decision to close down applications for new private sessions as at September 30 this year. Because we must complete our inquiry and deliver our report by December of next year, December 2017, we have to and we have committed to hearing a private session with every individual registered with us. We've calculated, therefore, that we have to close our registrations by September 30 to ensure that steady number of about 1,500 people will all have been given the opportunity to participate in a private session before we finish. Most of the people who are attending our private sessions are adults, although we do now have a small number of children coming through. We have a prisoner engagement program as well, in which private sessions are being conducted in prisons, and I don't have the exact numbers for you, but suffice to say considerable numbers of prisoners have requested the opportunity to give us their account of their sexual abuse as a child in an institution or an institutional context. We've engaged with a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their advocacy and support groups to assist and support those who wish to meet with us, in particular across rural and regional and remote areas, as well as the urban centres. So whilst the primary purpose of our private sessions is to bear witness to those who wish to be heard in this way, we are also collecting a range of de-identified data with the express permission of each of the people who attend in our private sessions. And that range of de-identified data, such as institution type, the time between the abuse to the first disclosure, the barriers to disclosure, gender and age of victim, survivor and perpetrator, and impacts as described by the victim survivor. This data, as you can readily see, will produce a profound collection of information which will tell its own terrible story back to us as a nation. Our interim report, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of information about that report which has been published. That was our first report published back in June 2014, and it provided some preliminary information as at that time as to, as we called them at that stage, the themes coming through in private sessions. And I thought I would just pick out a couple by way of example to give you some sense of what was coming through at that time, and indeed has continued to come through and add weight to those themes. I've chosen in particular the theme of disclosure to give you a little bit more detail about that, as I thought it may be of particular interest to this group. So an analysis of some of our early private sessions data showed that the average time to disclose childhood sexual abuse is about 22 years, with men taking longer to disclose than women. As many of you would know, the most common reported barriers to disclosure are shame, embarrassment, self-blame, and self-doubt. We've also picked up other common barriers, themes being expressed to us: a fear of not being believed, feeling like there was no one to disclose to, not understanding what was happening was sexual abuse, threats and inducements to remain silent, complex and enmeshed relationships with the perpetrator. And we are hearing from some people that they disclosed what was happening to them at the time and were not believed, and some were even punished, and punished brutally in some cases. Those themes that I've gone through with you, feelings of shame, embarrassment and self-blame, keeping children silent, have been well understood, as most of you in this room would know, in the research in the last couple of decades at least. But it is worth noting that despite the apparent advances in breaking down the silence, as we've called it, there are still relatively contemporary reports emerging in private sessions that demonstrate people are still having to overcome feelings of shame, embarrassment and self-blame and fear of being seen, and I quote from them, as weak or as damaged, and having to forge through all of those barriers to disclose. Again, some of the more contemporary accounts of some of those reporting are stating that they've done so whilst fearing rejection and shunning from the community in and around the institution in which they have experienced the abuse. This appears to be especially so in what we would generally describe as closed or closely knit communities. Tragically, the evidence emerging in some public hearings is demonstrating that fear of shunning and ostracism has been well-founded. There's also a substrata of this group, that fear of shunning and ostracism group, particular to young boys. Many men and males are coming through in higher numbers than women, roughly around 60 to 65% male, obviously 35% women. Many men coming into private sessions report that they've feared being branded as being gay if they reported a sexual attack upon themselves by another male, and often then feared that they would that would brand them and make them the subject of beatings and bullying from other boys. And sadly, we have evidence from witnesses in our public hearings who have told us this has happened to them, in school settings in particular, where they've disclosed to a peer, or in circumstances where, for example, they've been seen to be getting, in quotation marks, special treatment from a teacher who, of course, it's later understood, has been grooming that young boy and sometimes actually has sexually abused him as well. Threats and inducements, another area, would be well known, I'm sure, to most people in this room. The knowledge of the use of threats and inducements by perpetrators, as I've said, to maintain a child's silence won't be new to you, but the nature of some of those threats and inducements being reported to us by people attending private sessions speaks to why we have such havoc and the huge levels of detrimental impact upon some of the people who are coming to speak with us. Let me give you an example of what I mean. For the child of faith who's told by an abusive priest or a reverend or a brother that they would be punished by God if they told anyone, or conversely that they would be rewarded by God, or that they have been chosen by God to engage in this activity, makes clear why reporting may take some years, if not decades. And of course there's the converse of threats, although sometimes existing side by side. They're the accounts being given by people who report being showered with gifts, given special treatment and told they were special by people such as abusive teachers, sports coaches, youth leaders and religious personnel. These sorts of inducements in institutional settings can often present as plausible behaviour, of course, a teacher rewarding a student for good work, and be equally believable and therefore confusing for the child, and I should add, confusing in some circumstances, of course, for the adults around that institution observing that behaviour. People have also told us in the context of disclosure that delay in reporting can become a barrier in itself. So in other words, people have reported that initially they didn't have the words to describe what was happening, and then by the time they did have the words and the maturity to understand it, a number of years had passed, and for them, this made them feel that this would make their report less credible, and for others, they've told us that it felt then like a retrograde step to go back to the traumatic memory of the abuse that they had suppressed or repressed for so long. We've also been told, in terms of barriers to disclosure, that a number of people are reporting that their reluctance to report as a child has included a perception that their parents would be devastated, and therefore the child sought to protect the parent from that distress. This is a common recurring theme in the faith-based institutions where a child's parents are committed to the faith and perceived by the child as devout. It's also a commonly expressed view by those who were abused in school settings, in particular in independent and private school settings, where they've understood that their family has spent a lot of money to have them there and spoken regularly of the sacrifices to keep a child at that particular school. We've also had a look in particular in much more in our public hearings about the barriers to adults reporting. I should say there will be a published paper available for you which has some more detail in it. So I'm skipping over some parts of the paper which will contain some more information. Not to leave you completely demolished by that information, let me tell you that we are picking up also some factors which may assist children to report. During the course of both our private sessions and indeed our public hearings, it's been apparent that we are receiving information about factors which may assist children to report sexual abuse. And I'll go to just a couple of those examples. So people have reported to us that concern for another child or children, either at the time or early into their adulthood, has been a catalyst for them to report. This has been particularly marked in circumstances where the abuser and children were in out-of-home care placements, such as orphanages or foster care placements. We've also seen in more contemporary cases and in some of our public hearings examples of children reporting to adults or peers in the wake of that child's participation in a school-based prevention program. I should pause for a moment to say that the Royal Commission has commissioned research into school-based prevention programs, and indeed we've now already published one paper on our website prepared by Dr. Claudia Pitts, and that piece of research directs itself to the efficacy of preschool prevention programs. And I encourage you, if you're interested, to have a look at that paper. It certainly provides some very valuable information in there for us on the Royal Commission to consider. People have also reported to us in terms of what has assisted them to disclose is being asked in a sensitive and appropriate way by a trusted and caring or compassionate adult. And this has assisted them to proceed through to a decision to report, and in some cases to proceed through with an investigation and prosecution. Others have reported to us that they have trusted and disclosed to peers That can be sometimes a little bit of a mixed bag, as you heard me say before. Sometimes those peers have been very understanding and supportive and given the young person very appropriate encouragement, and other times have been negative and rejecting. We have also picked up impacts out of our private sessions. So leaving the theme of disclosure, I should say, just whilst on the themes coming out of private sessions, that we have, and again I've got the latest numbers for you, as at the end of last week, we've made 1,606 referrals to police and law enforcement agencies to date. In terms of impacts, in our June 2014 report, we stated in that report that almost 9 in 10 victim survivors report impacts on their health, including depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and lack of trust in authority. We also stated that victim survivors also commonly report impacts on relationships, and we're commonly hearing about the secondary impacts on their families as well. Of course, impacts on education and economic circumstances are another very common feature of those reports. In terms of institution types, we reported in June 2014 that many victim survivors were reporting abuse out of the old pre-deinstitutionalisation reformatories, as some of those places were called, orphanages and children's homes, but educational institutions were also commonly reported. At that time, we reported that 9 out of 10 perpetrators were male. Those figures are fluctuating a little bit now, but it hovers around somewhere around 90 at some stages, trending up to about 95% male. It'll probably settle somewhere around the 92 to 93%, I suspect, maybe slightly lower. The reported perpetrators were most likely to be, as I said, members of the clergy or religious orders, followed by teachers and residential care workers. That was our reporting figures as at June 2014. Again, you won't be surprised to hear that we're also having reported to us that a number of victim survivors were initially sexually abused by a family member in their home, removed from home for that reason, and then sexually abused in their placement, including in foster care. So those reports, that interim report has been published and it's available on our website for anyone who is interested in following through on that information. Let me turn very quickly to our public hearings or case studies. These are the second pillar of our work and the most public part of the work that they're doing. They, of course, require the Royal Commission to engage in a more detailed examination of how specific institutions responded to actual incidents of child sexual abuse. We reported at June 2014, we've had over 1,000 separate institutions reported to us, and that number has grown steadily since that date. We've endeavoured our best to get a representative range of the institutions being reported to us. You can readily see that we obviously can't go to each and every institution that's being reported to us. So we're doing our best to get a representative spread of those institutions being reported to us. We've completed 40 public hearings to date, and case study number 41 will start on Monday. Case study number 41 is a public hearing into some institutions who have provided services to children with disabilities. 22 of our case study reports have been tabled in Parliament to date, and they too are now available on our website. We anticipate that case study 41, which, as I've said, will look into the sexual abuse of children within some institutions providing services to children with a disability, will obviously add to the work that we've already been doing with respect to this very particular vulnerable group. We have an enormous team of lawyers behind us, as you can imagine, who are usually collecting and perusing hundreds and sometimes thousands of documents and conducting investigations behind the scenes into that material that's being obtained. Let me turn now to the research component of our work. It is obviously the third pillar of our work, and with the resources that have been provided to us, we have been able to initiate a very significant research program that will advance our understanding, we anticipate, of the work that we're doing, and we anticipate contribute to the creation of an evidence base for our recommendations. I should hasten to add that the research program is directed at building on rather than duplicating the existing body of research in the areas relevant to us. It's aimed at covering historical, current and future issues across 4 broad areas: across prevention, identification, response and justice for victims. So to give you a sense of the scale of that research work, our program consists of over 100 projects, and we're working with over 70 of the key experts in the field, both in Australia and internationally, and across more than 30 universities and research centres. We're, as I've said, obviously drawing on existing research and information to fill the gaps. We have Associate Professor Dr. Leah Bromfield, who was appointed to provide strategic advice to us on our leadership, on our research program. And she, as many of you would know, is the Deputy Director of the Australian Centre for Child Protection at the University of South Australia. So we have, under her leadership and supervision, established several advisory groups to guide us on specific research areas and projects, as well as provide oversight and review to those projects. We have external experts working with our internal subject matter experts who come from a diverse range of disciplines, which include criminologists, historians, psychologists and social workers and academic lawyers. And of course our research program, as some of you who might have had the opportunity to have a look at some of the work that's going on, you'll see it covers a diverse range of methods, including data collection, literature reviews, legislative reviews, historical analysis, as well as some primary research. We have 24 research reports published to date on our website and another 76 research projects either completed and under review or still underway. With many of these projects, they will be combined with other methods of working with that research in the context of our Royal Commission. In some circumstances, that research will assist the legal team when developing questions or developing parts of an investigation in a public hearing. It might be the backdrop for us having roundtable discussions and forums on particular topics or subject areas that we've identified as relevant to areas that we take the view we will make recommendations in. and often we're using targeted participants with either expertise or personal experience, and sometimes both, to assist in the development of our thinking and our analysis and our conclusions. So if you stop to pause for a moment and think about the breadth of our task, we have to look across state borders, across disciplines, across cultures, across religious groupings and affiliations, across government departments, and a broad range of institutions, including schools, sports and recreation organisations, churches, religious groups, and many others. Amongst our challenges, of course, will be to arrive at recommendations that are evidence-based, specific enough where necessary to cover particular issues which have emerged in our public inquiry, and general enough in other areas to span a diverse range of institutions across a diverse range of different contexts, including, as I've said, rural and remote communities, from the Tiwi Islands all the way to our most populous multicultural urban centres. Now, in the paper that will be provided to you, I have given a couple of examples of those areas that we are currently working through, which are at this stage in our development what I would describe as very much dependent on the research that's coming through. One of those areas is the development of child-safe organisations. So we are endeavouring to meet the challenge or an expectation that we will provide guidance and conclusions and indeed recommendations as to what the key elements of a child-safe institution are. So we have commissioned research we engaged the Children and Youth Research Centre at the Queensland University of Technology to help us identify those common elements, and we then tested that through key elements of a child-safe organisation research study undertaken by the Social Policy Research Centre at the University of New South Wales and the Parenting Research Centre. That the research used an adapted Delphi study methodology to elicit the advice, opinions and consensus of a panel of experts. Indeed, the research confirmed agreement amongst the experts on the characteristics of a child-safe organisation, and the Commission is now giving further consideration to the elements outlined in this research with a view to reaching a concluded position. Of course, you'll understand that our position will be informed, of course, by our exposure to all of the accounts that we're hearing in private sessions as well as public hearings. I have set out in the paper the elements that are coming through for those in those child-safe organisations, which again may be of interest to some of you. And we have also, I've also set out in the paper something about the criminal justice work that we've been doing, because of course our research agenda includes a significant criminal justice component, and that's an area in which we have published a very significant and groundbreaking piece of work focused on jury reasoning, and in particular jury reasoning in joint and separate trials of child sexual abuse. We're led to believe this is the largest study ever undertaken of jury behaviour in regards to child sexual abuse, and it involves 90 mock jury deliberations using more than 1,000 people who were taken from lists of people in New South Wales eligible to serve as jurors. That piece of work has now been published, and the results of it, of course, will be invaluable to the Commission's work in this area, and indeed provide valuable insight to us for our legal policy work. So I wanted to just say one last thing. We have already made 2 reports in the area of redress and civil litigation. That's one very significant report. I think it's over 500 pages and contains 99 recommendations. We have also published our work in the Working with Children Checks area, which from memory I think contains 39 recommendations. We have also, some of you may be relieved to hear, in particular those people in policy areas, we have also touched upon in our research what makes recommendations actually implementable. This requires us, our work requires us to produce recommendations that are based on evidence and that can be implemented and respond to contemporary issues. So to assist us with this task, again, we've commissioned a few pieces of research, one of those from the Parenting Research Centre, which has examined and has been published, by the way, and is also on our website, which examines the level of implementation of recommendations from past relevant inquiries. And this work provides an assessment of the types of recommendations with the highest proportion, recommendations I should say from past relevant inquiries, relevant to us, with the highest proportion rated as implemented in full, as well as the subject of the recommendations with the highest rating of implementation in full, and those results are very interesting to look at. The research, again, for those of you interested, was that particular piece of research was reached, conclusions were reached after interviews with 43 key stakeholders and a survey of 44 public servants. So at the conclusion of our commission in December 2017, we'll present our final recommendations on laws, policies, procedures, practices and systems to strengthen the prevention of and response to the sexual abuse of children in institutions or an institutional context. Our research, in combination with our case studies and private sessions, has already provided and will continue to provide a strong evidence base for reform. I would like to take this opportunity to thank those of you in the room who have already contributed to our processes and our work and our roundtables and responding to our submissions, our request for submissions via our issues papers. And I encourage any of you who are interested and wish to do that to, we welcome your participation. This Royal Commission provides the opportunity to tell the national story of children, sexual abuse and institutions, so we can lay the foundations for a new story, one that provides a safer future for children in our nation. Thank you.